Hey Jackie, how's it going?
I'm good, Johnny. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You've been holding up okay?
Yeah. I'm pandemic fine.
I loved your brand new book, Before the Ever After, though I have to confess that I've never not loved a Jacqueline Woodson book.
Thank you.
Your protagonist is ZJ, a young boy whose father was a star tight end in the NFL until he started to suffer from a degenerative brain disease. You told me in our exchange before this interview that you have a relationship with the NFL and the NBA that has gotten more complicated. Can you say a little bit about that?
It's interesting because I do love sports. I've always loved sports. I've always loved basketball. I ran track in college. I've always had a kind of precarious relationship with football. My partner's a physician, so the kids were never allowed to play. But there's such a deep beauty to the sport and such a complexity in the way that black and brown bodies get battled and sold and used that has always struck a chord with me. And also, I think that the history of coming to understand CTE was very complicated and not always honest. And even with the protest around taking a knee and what happened with Kaepernick, all of it started just kind of making me look at the sport in a different way.
If you were asked to explain the concept of masculinity to a group of 10-year-old boys, what would you
hmm
say?
That's such a great question. Having a son, I would say masculinity is about this is subjective, right? This is completely subjective. I would say what it means to be a good person in the world. Like, how do you, it's the same thing as femininity, it's the same thing as humanity. Like, how do you walk through the world honestly inside your body? And how do you treat people in a certain way that is good, inherently good? Yeah, I think that's what I would say it was, especially now as we're trying to teach our son about how to be not only safe in the world as a brown male, but also how to be safe in the world if he ends up dating women or just engaging with women and engaging with people in general. Like, what does that look like inside his um, male body, inside his cis male body?
It was a little bizarre to read Before the Ever After immediately after I had read Victor Laval's amazing novel, The Changeling, which
Oh.
similarly and also very differently explores this concept of happily ever after. Have you read The
Huh.
Changeling?
No, but I'm writing it down right now because I love his writing.
It's a phenomenal novel, and
Is it new?
it's not new.
Okay.
It's a couple years old. Where did your own exploration of happily ever after start?
It, of course, started with fairy tales, right? And from a very young age, we knew that they were fairy tales, that there was no such thing as a happily ever after because from day to day, life was different. And you had moments of happily now, but not an ever after. And I really just thought that in terms of thinking about our youth and that idea that this is how we first learn about what life should be like or what life could be like was in fairy tales because we got the very deconstructed fairy tales, right? We didn't get the Grimm Brothers Grimm. We got Disney. So it wasn't Cinderella's, feet, the sister's feet getting bloody trying to fit into the shoe, which gives a very different message about what it means to try to fit into some kind of system or space that you really don't need to be in or try to mold yourself into. Um, we get this idea that you marry someone and live happily. You get rescued in this way. And I think very young, I started kind of questioning that.
At one point in your book, ZJ is talking about one of his best friends, and he says Daniel's not smart like Ollie is, not school smart. He fails tests sometimes, even when he studies. But as we sit working on that puzzle and talking, I realize that he's a whole nother kind of smart. For me personally, ever since I was a kid, I've never been able to figure out what the word smart means. Do you know what the word smart means?
Uh, I thought I used to, right? I grew up believing that it was associated with academics, right? Or deep, deep knowing. And that was different from wisdom. Like even as a kid, like someone who was wise had all of this information that came from age because you weren't a wise kid. All of these misconceptions are part of my childhood. But I feel like I do know what smart is now. It's someone's brilliance recognized and affirmed. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of academic intelligence.
So the smartness comes from the recognition and the affirmation. So
Exactly.
the smartness comes almost from the other person.
I think so, because I hope, I like to believe that everyone believes they're smart, right? That everyone believes that they have something that is their gift of brilliance. But maybe I'm conflating smart and brilliance. I don't know. I had always grown up believing that smart meant you did well in school. You were academic, right? Like my sister was smart. My older brother was smart. I was not smart. But I was gifted. But all of that started getting very conflated, I feel like. So in that moment with Daniel, the message he gets, right, is that he's not smart because he doesn't do well on tests, and so he has the demoralization that comes from not doing well in this space that you're supposed to do a certain kind of well. But then you see him go through this puzzle and you know his brain is working, like something brilliant is going on there that is not being recognized in school. And I think that happens for so many young people.
When you reference the verse in Rapper's Delight about going over to a friend's house to eat, is it fair to say that you've been waiting 40 years to put that verse in a book?
At least. That song has stayed with me, and I never know what's coming or what music is going to play into the narrative, and it was like a puzzle piece. It's like, this fits right here. And so yeah, I knew it was going. I mean, when I first heard the song as a young person, I knew it was always going to be with me and that it would come back around in some way, as so much music does. But Rapper's Delight is one of the ones that has stayed with me. And so, because it was like a movie, it was a song that was like a movie, like you got to see every scene of it. And you got to, and there were ways in which you imagined every single member of the group, in their narrative. And so, but going over to a friend's house to eat, and while the stinky foods are steaming, your mind starts to dream about the moment that it's time to leave, and just like knowing that, knowing what that feels like as both a child and an adult.
It's interesting, like that. One of the most exciting moments of that song is the most mundane moment.
It is so true.